hopefully everyone can see the presentation that we're sharing right now. You should see the big first slide, Casey Spirit Playbook Mobility Strategy Session. And since we normally start about 5 minutes after the established time, I'm just going to get it rolling. So welcome. This is our fourth mobility strategy session. This is going to be a little bit different than what you've experienced before if you've been to one of these. Hit the next slide. But we're really excited about this format, and we think it's gonna lend just another layer of analysis and understanding for what the future should look like for transportation from a bit more of a human perspective. So this strategy session is titled Personas and Stories of Future Mobility. It's 3:30 right now. We're hoping to get you out of here by 5, and so let's go. So we're going to be using a web application called mural.co, and we're going to organize ourselves by which city council district we live in. So if for some reason during the mural process you're unable to comment, you can use the chat or raise your hand, and we will be sure to record your response. I believe there is some issue with the way Mural works with Apple devices. I remember, Travis, can you maybe we can get out in front of that real quick?
Sure. When we get into, and I'll show you this on screen, we're going to walk you through how to use Mural today. But if you're on an Apple device, when we give you the link to access the Mural for your group, you're going to need to go to your app store and download the free Mural app before clicking that link. Okay, I'll say that again as we get closer.
I wanted to mention it just right up front. So, okay. So that's the first part of the housekeeping. Next slide, please. So in the chat box, we would like you to tell us, where do you live or work? So if you live and work in Kansas City, Missouri, pick one. If you either live or work in Kansas City, Missouri, let us know where you're at there. So north would be council districts 1 and 2. Central would be 3 and 4. And south would be council districts 5 and 6. Again, north is 1 and 2, central's 3 and 4, south is 5 and 6. So if you could let us know north, central, or south in the chat box, we're going to try to sort of divvy up the groups this way by geography. In the effort of moving things along, please go to the next slide. Okay, Zoom meeting guide. I know we've all been here before, but we got to do it. You've got your mute and unmute, and then you can turn your video on and off in case you don't want to be on video. The participants side panel is the 2 people. Then you can log a comment in the chat box by clicking that speaker bubble. Raise your hand from the reactions. That's one that always gets me because I'm more of a Teams user. So if you want to raise your hand, it's in the reactions panel. And then when you want to leave the meeting, click end. And it always gets me because you got to click it twice. So you got to click end once and then leave the meeting next. Okay, so the overview. We're going to sort of go over what we've talked about in the last 3 mobility sessions, strategy sessions, as well as sort of the purpose of why we're here, a little bit about comprehensive planning, the transportation element of the comprehensive plan, and then kind of give a rundown of what we heard so far. And all of that is going to lead us into the activity for today, which is this personas activity. So the idea is that we're going to talk about stories of future mobility. We're going to sort of put ourselves inside the experience of someone in 2040 using the transportation system and what their experience is like. Some of that's not going to be perfect. We're going to still talk about, some of the things we might need to still work on, but what it should be like to actually get around Kansas City, Missouri in 2040. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So the purpose of these strategy sessions is to guide the direction for multimodal transportation. In doing so, we want to maintain a citywide big picture view. But today we're going to zoom in a little bit closer and understand that those citywide big picture outlooks have real world consequences for people in their daily lives. And we want to sort of get a better grip on what that looks like. We also want to be able to voice the issues, values, and priorities from your perspective. And additionally, today, we want to be able to try to assume someone else's perspective or assume a different perspective and understand what it's like to be a mobility, get around in the transportation system from that perspective. We also really need help, because we could never do this on our own, identifying challenges, opportunities, and implementation pathways. We can only do so much. We kind of got to rely on the hive mind a little bit to understand everything. And then lastly, a lot of you have been here with us for multiple strategy sessions, and I assume you're going to be here for the next 2. So we would love for you to channel your investment in this process to act as champions for the plan when it goes up for adoption. So the KC Spirit Playbook, you've heard this before. I'm just going to go right through it. It's an update to our existing comprehensive plan, which was passed in 1997 and called Focus. It provides guidance for many important policy areas, in addition to sort of land development, in particular transportation, housing, and livability issues. And this particular element is focused on livability or transportation. And it's these plans run on a 20-year cycle. So we're thinking in that sort of 20-year time horizon. We're in the middle of the sort of 3-step process of making this plan. We're in sort of the vision and goal creation right there in the middle. And as we'll tell you later, the next couple meetings are going to be having y'all review the recommendations for this element of the plan that we're going to be putting forth. And then lastly, we're going to enact the plan. So mobility is one of 4 strategy session sort of groupings. We've also got serviceability, visibility, and livability. We're just wrapped up visibility, and mobility we're still going strong, but serviceability and livability will be kicking off soon. But for us, the mobility session is intended to create strong links to other plan elements. As we know, mobility is very intersectional subject matter and kind of touches on everything, and everything else is either enhanced or directly related to transportation. And one of our big goals is to synthesize existing transportation plans and policies into a single vision for Kansas City, Missouri. So the way that the playbook and the comprehensive plan is sort of laid out hierarchically is we have this vision of where we want to be, and that's undergirded by values of what we believe in. And then we set up goals, things we need to achieve in order to get to those, reach those values and vision. And then we've got specific outcomes in the form of objectives, and then the actions and strategies to achieve those objectives. And then we will know whether or not we're doing a good job through the implementation metrics. So currently, a lot of this is based on the fact that we have a bunch of plans out there, and we're trying to make sure that we're filling in gaps and addressing issues and updating existing recommendations and finding where our wires might be crossed a little bit. And so as part of that, we're constantly sort of researching through this database that we've created of every plan recommendation in the city to make sure that what we're doing is done and recommended in the context of the plans that already exist. We don't want to duplicate any effort or cross out anything, but want to make sure that we're updating everything we're doing to adhere to this vision that we're creating for ourselves for 2040. And now I'm going to kick it over to Jay just to remind everyone of some of the key performance indicators and data associated with transportation that are sort of driving a lot of our thinking.
Yep, thanks, Bobby. So Bobby mentioned, we have we've done a lot of planning, the focus plan, the area plans. There's been a ton of recommendations. And as we've talked before, a lot of those recommendations really hinge on the desire to make transit better, make walking and biking better in terms of mobility, that is, and just make it easier for our residents to get around town without a car in general. So looking at some of those metrics, this just shows how we were getting to work in 2010 and the 5 years preceding. This is a 5-year average, and then how we were in 2019 and those 5 years preceding. And you can see, even though we've been making a lot of recommendations for making walking, biking, and transit easier, more convenient, we actually have kind of backpedaled a little bit. So we have fewer people using transit, we have fewer people walking, and we have fewer people biking, or about the same biking, but still only 0.2% commuting by bikes. So this is one of those key performance indicators that shows really we've made a lot of recommendations, but we haven't made a lot of real progress in the city. Another big part of this plan and everything we're doing with the KC Spirit Playbook and what we're being informed by is equity. Equity is a very big issue for us, for you all, for the city. And what these maps show and what we've talked about in the past is we know there's equity issues in Kansas City, as there are in most every large city in the nation. And these equity issues lead to specific outcomes for our residents. So you can see those 4 zip codes there, primarily east of the Paseo. The map on the left shows life expectancy. The map on the right shows fatal crash rates. So in terms of public health and also in terms of mobility, we have much higher rates of fatal car crashes in the areas that have been historically segregated, and we have much lower life expectancy. So when we're talking about equity, this is a really good thing to talk about. We're thinking about noise pollution, environmental pollution, air pollution, fatal traffic crashes, and how we can actually address those equity issues through our transportation decisions. And I'm going to turn it over to Travis now to explain our persona building activity.
Thanks, Jay. You all, I just want to let you know, I have my camera off today because I'm accessing the internet in a way that I don't normally do. And so I'm trying to keep my bandwidth down, so I have my camera off. But I know that so far, I think there's about 50 some odd people in the meeting. If you're just now joining, please in the chat box, let us know where you live or where you work. You can put north, central, or south. It's based on council district, and the map is to the left. We're doing that because we want to organize in small groups by council district today. Let's go to the next slide, Jay. So over all of the engagement that we've had so far for the playbook, we've been able to develop a series of goals that are related to mobility. And so the ones that have been developed thus far are on screen. So you see things like sustainable growth and quality design, making sure we have a good framework for a transportation infrastructure. You see things about having a strong neighborhood, making sure that we have and embrace diversity and we create opportunity, that we have a connected city in terms of increased transportation options. And we also think about what's going to be good for the next generation of people that are going to live here. What does it mean to be a smart city? We have goals related to those things thus far. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what it looks like when you take all of the detailed writing that goes along with the snapshot of the goals that you see on screen, and then see what types of words come up. You see things like connected and accessible and sustainable and making investments and doing targeting. That's what a lot of the mobility goals relate to. Now, the last time that we talked to you, and when I say the last time, I mean earlier in the summer in July, we did talk about transportation equity, and we talked about where investment should be in terms of transportation. You all said that the people that participated at that particular meeting said that they wanted to see a more aggressive amount of investment, and that when we talked about mobility in Kansas City in 2040, that mobility, much like it meant for Focus 25 years ago, mobility meant access. And we're talking about people moving them back and forth. Moving from July to August, we had a more detailed conversation where we looked not just at where you want to go in terms of projects, but more so what type of data do we have as it relates to land use and transportation, two other topics. And again, we're going towards creating policies, creating recommendations that support transportation. So when we asked you all about land use and transportation and how aggressive we should be in pursuing mobility goals that are driven by land use decision-making, we ask you, what were your thoughts about it today versus what were they in the future? And today, you all in the blue, you can see the lighter color on screen. We're more on the we're not so aggressive, but we could be more aggressive going in the future. And you'll see that trend through the next two topics. But let's get into a little bit of the detail about what you talked about in regards to land use and transportation. There is a foundational thing, which is Kansas City has a lot of roadways, a lot of infrastructure. We have a lot of lower density development the further out you go from the core of the city, and having those transportation networks impacted how the area is developed. So we had conversation about the fact that transportation drives land use instead of land use driving transportation. We talked about sprawl. We talked about there are new policies coming in like Vision Zero and whether or not those policies have teeth and how to apply that. We talked about street design again. There's a lot of comment about complete streets and making sure we have better transit. What does it mean to respect our boulevard system and how important that is? We talked about that as well. On the next slide, you'll see some of the other things we talked about in relationship to land use and transportation. And so that had to do with parking, zoning, and incentives. A lot of times when you're talking about land use and transportation, you run into parking and conversations about whether or not you have parking minimums or maximums. And there's a lot in the chat about having parking minimums and then really thinking in a thoughtful way about how do we accommodate parking for the future. We talked about zoning as well, tying mobility to affordable housing and having less strict zoning guidelines or zoning changes. We talked about not having so many single-use neighborhoods. We also talked about incentives, incentivizing smaller scale development rather than a lot of the large scale development that you see happening across Kansas City right now. Our next topic had to do with regional mobility. So Kansas City connecting to other cities in our region. We asked today, how aggressive do you believe Kansas City is in improving upon its role as a regional leader in transportation, creating a sustainable mobility experience? What is that versus what is it today? And just like in the other, there's more of a somewhat aggressive right now. In the future, we could be more aggressive in terms of policy. The conversation around those topics had to do with frequency of connections, priorities, and again, policy. So transit is a big component of mobility. You all know we have the streetcar, we're looking at expanding that, but sidewalks are a key component of that. Transit-oriented development is a key component of that. Not always looking at improvements from a north-south perspective, but an east-west perspective is important. When we're thinking about priorities, where our parkways and boulevards are, and what the right-of-way is next to that in relationship to the trails that could be built, how do we prioritize equity, the importance of doing that, or also some discussion topics. Policy, again, we started talking about the parking minimums and Vision Zero, whether or not we should actually then just have parking maximums. And we started talking about climate protection. And we know that those are some really key topics when we think about transportation and regional mobility because you're expanding your footprint. Let's go to the next slide, Jay. Costs, incentives in the airport and equity were also some topics you talked about. We're talking about costs. We're looking at just a new way of thinking at how we do our roadways. Do we have a roadway audit that focuses on the number of lanes and the cost to maintain them? Because we have a lot of roadway and it is expensive. Is there a way to create low density serving transit? Often when we look at transit, we look at it in terms of your high density areas and using that as a way to justify where you have transit service. And then we also talked about the funding programs. And Jay's using his cursor to highlight the surface transportation program and then tax increment financing as a way, big funding sources for transportation when you're thinking about regional mobility. There are also other types of incentives that you could be thinking about, like using incentives to drive affordable housing and then making a tie to your transportation network. And then what does it mean also to have entrepreneurship back in the urban core and incentivizing that when you think about regional mobility. The airport came up again. I think every time we talk about transportation, we do hear about the airport and trying to get other transportation modes there. And then equity. We want to be sure that we're thinking about gentrification and its impacts, as well as thinking about where traffic calming improvements are made and what does it mean to connect zero car households to job centers. And so we looked at a lot of mapping about where that's located and what's happening. Let's go to the next slide. Our last topic was safety. And again, we asked how aggressive are we today? Where do you want to be in the future? And we're talking about eliminating traffic deaths as the top priority for our transportation investments. Today, you all thought we were either not at all or somewhat aggressive. In the future, we should be aggressive, even very aggressive. Some of the conversation around that topic of safety had to do with, again, you're seeing some patterns here. What are our policies? We could have shorter crossing distances. We could have pedestrian infrastructure that really supports neighborhoods and households that don't have cars. We could lower the speed limits. We could do other things. With bike lanes, we start talking about the value of having protected bike lanes and having a whole network of that. Incorporating our scooters is also really important. Street design and pedestrian design also was a topic. Again, you're seeing things like traffic calming and how people get to cross the street and what type of safe capacity do we have the crosswalks there. People often feel safe if you're biking, if the bike path or bike way is separated. And so you're seeing a lot of that. And then there's a great comment about designing for people first and not just fire trucks. We know emergency response is important, but sometimes that begins to drive the width of our streets, which also impacts the distance that people have to cross, how fast you can go on that wider street, and so on. Let's go to the next slide. Enforcement, speed, and equity were the last couple of topics regarding safety that we had our conversations about. Enforcement is a big issue, and how is that done? Street design is a way to address that. There were conversation about the education of not only like law enforcement, but also just safety for everybody that's in a car or walking or biking. And how is that, again, enforced? Who are we targeting, if anyone? Are we thinking about dangerous drivers? Are we looking at infrastructure solutions that match up to areas where we see we're having a problem? Speed, again, as we've talked about in other meetings, was a big issue. Looking at where we have our problem intersections and areas and then doing something about them, providing specific types of traffic calming like your speed humps and so on. And then equity, again, we want to give a lot of attention to the east side. And Jay's already shown in his other mapping where the investment has been, where the safety issues have been, and you're going to see a lot of that in your breakout groups today. So we've been talking a lot about the future, 2040, what that's like. And you all have been doing an excellent job of looking at the data that we've shared, even bringing in some of your own data and telling us what you think the future should be. What we want to do is place people in that future. Because you might have, as you're saying, we need, I don't know, end of trip facilities for our bicycle accommodations in the future. You might have in your mind who that person is that's using that. So we're going to use personas to figure out what's going to be happening or who's using the system in the north, the central part of this.
I think we may have lost Travis. Travis, are you there? Okay, well, I will take over for here then. So she's just kind of going through this final of how we're going to think about this. And when we're going through these exercises, what we're thinking about is coming up with a specific person in mind, someone we're thinking of. Oftentimes when we think through the future, we project onto someone. Maybe it's ourselves in the future, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a child that's going to be growing up in 20 years, other things, and think about what they're going to do, what their issues are going to be, what their expectations are going to be, and really put together those personas of those people for these different areas of the city and different goals, so that we can use that to guide our recommendations going forward, and think about the recommendations we're making today and how are they going to impact these people in the future.
Thanks, Jay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Awesome. I was just chatting and I think y'all couldn't hear me. I'm so glad you were able to take it and keep on running. All right, so I am back again. And so in our groups, we want to build on those personas. So you're going to have basically a digital sheet where you give your persona a name. You talk about maybe where they work, what they do. What are their transportation goals? When you say goals, where are they trying to go? How are they trying to get from point A to B to C to D? How do they feel about that? And no, you can't ask about age, but you can say someone is younger, someone is older, someone's senior, and so on. So we're going to be able to do that in our groups. And the way that we're going to do that, if you go to the next slide, is we're going to use the tool called Mural. Again, if you're joining late, please drop into the chat where you live or work, north, central, south part of Kansas City, so that we can get you into the right discussion group today. I see we've got some people in the south, some people in the central, some people in the north, so I hope we have a good distribution. Essentially, we're going to use a tool called Mural. Mural is basically a digital whiteboard, I would say. big digital sheet of paper. If we were in person, we would have you all in different rooms. We would have lots of tables and lots of paper and lots of markers. But we're going to use Mural today. Jay, if you click enter, you'll hit the next thing, which is how to zoom in on Mural. When you come into it, it's going to have a lot of content. You'll say, oh my gosh, I can't see it. It's so small. And you want to zoom in. Your facilitator will share his or her screen, so you'll be able to see everything as we go through the conversation. But we do need to add content to that. So the content's available on the left. You click that, and then you drag what becomes available. The easiest thing to do is to add sticky notes or Post-its, digital Post-its to your mural. And there's different types, squares, circles, rectangles, etc. And they come in different colors. Hit enter again, Jay. And what you guys will see is that if you drag one of those out or hit enter again, Jay, double click, then you'll get a Post-it note and you can type on it immediately. We're just basically using it to take notes today. You can also add other types of things to your murals besides sticky notes. You can add icons from the left by clicking and dragging them. You can do arrows. The icon menu, which we are going to try to use today, is searchable. There's also on the left, photos that you can grab and so on. Now, when you get into your small group, we want to make sure that everyone gets introduced, and then your facilitator will give you a link to your group's mural, and it will say something like the North persona on it. You're going to be tempted to enter as a visitor immediately so you can get in there. That's really great, but before you do, please try to type your name at the top to let us know at least who that is. Otherwise, you'll come in as a visiting insect or some type of animal, and that's okay too, but we'd like to know if it's Sean or somebody else. When you get into your mural, though, you'll see it has a lot of content. There's some data on the left, and there's some data on the right, and some your mural on the left of it. Again, if you have an Apple device, before you click on the link that your facilitator provides you, if you want to mural with us, you'll need to download the free Mural app from your app store and then click on it. Regardless if you're on the phone today or if you're on a smaller device, etc., it's okay. We're going to share our screens with you, and we're just using the Mural to gather all of our feedback. It's going to be a very well organized sheet when we're done, and we'll use it to report back and share our personas with everyone. So with that, we're going to break into our groups, and we will be in there, I think, for about 40 minutes or so. Hey there, guys. Let's look at these murals.
Hello, hello.
Travis, we ended up with 5 teams, the two South groups combined. So we'll just look at A. Okay,
so but you have a North A though, don't you? Or you have a North?
Yes, we have a North A and a North B, whether those were actually people who live in the Northland.
It's okay. So what I'm going to do, you all, is I'm going to go to the name of your person, and I'd love to know who's reporting back. And I'll pan around. We'll do the name, what their goals were, and what the key recommendations were. So what's in their thought bubble? Who had Group A? Who's going to report back?
Heather's going to be reporting out for us in Group A.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather.
Hi. Yeah. Our person's name is Katie. The general description we made for her, she's in her late 30s. She lives near the airport on the west side of Northland. She works at Riverside. She has 2 kids. She's a single mom. She's got some college under her belt. Her goals, she's got kids to take to school. She needs to get to work. She needs to access some social services and take around to activities, doctor's appointments, things like that. So lots of driving involved. Having a personal car would make sense for her. Attitudes, she might be able to do carpooling. Her kids would ride a bus to school most likely. She would like to see more destination places to go with kids in the Northland rather than like a lot of destination places being in downtown or like south in the zoo. And she might want to see more transit and park and ride to get to destinations. Safety is a big concern for her. Safe biking and walking paths, sidewalks, and since the Northland is growing so much, just the concern is to having the construction and the infrastructure timed and organized so that there's not a lot of traffic. And then goals for 2040 is to just kind of to let Katie know of the public transportation options that are available and have that as, just an option of, I can take public transportation and just instead of always going to the car or walking or riding bikes. And then having, those destination places within a walkable or bike rideable distance.
Thanks, Heather. We've got Katie here. Awesome. You guys are really great. Let's see what the other persona for the Northland was. Persona B. Who's going to share the story of Persona B? It looks like that's a Galena.
We were
Maybe
just
Galena
debating
family.
that. I was chatting with Sean. I was kind of volunteering Sean, but I think maybe Bryce or Marcus as well. We didn't quite get to who is going to volunteer. So whichever you guys, whoever's excited to talk about this, feel free. Marcus says Sean volunteers.
Well, just look at my screen if you want. I'll just pan around to what you should, just so you could just read it. So we have the Galena family. Can you tell us about them?
Yeah, they're a great family. They're immigrants. They've just moved to the Northland. They're pretty active. They have 2 young girls. They are looking to enculturate and assimilate, I guess are good words. They do have a religious background, but Galena is in school as well as, take kind of the leader of the family as well.
Okay. What are some of their goals?
Let's see.
That's kind of our attitude, isn't it? There.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Scroll down. Hold on.
Perfect.
Saw that purple and went right there. Okay.
If you zoom out a little bit more, we've got the full on day in our life a little bit to the bottom. We ran out of space.
Right.
Oh, okay. Here we go. All right.
There you go.
Okay.
They get up, get the kids to school, gets herself to school and work, tries to find healthy food options for meals, then picks up the kids, and then she teaches yoga at night and makes pretty good money at it, and it keeps her healthy. And a lot of times her husband, Navish, comes with her.
Oh, I love that she has a husband and you have named him too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I was going to ask you what were your key recommendations. Maybe just share maybe some of the purple, what their attitudes were, or her attitudes were.
Jay, would you do that? I can't read some of them.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Thanks.
A lot of the attitudes were just the challenges of getting around throughout the day in the Northland. How does she get to all these places? They have one car in the household, so how do they juggle who's using the car at what time? Can they get around biking? Can they get around with transit? Getting south of the river, doing all the errands north of the river, and getting to all these places. So I think the attitude generally was it's challenging getting around, being dependent on a car, but trying to find other ways, get around, use e-bikes, use transit. So the attitude is that it's still a challenge to get around without a car, but she's making it happen.
Yeah, they would prefer not to use a car for sure.
Prefer not to use a car.
Oh, no. Horrible.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Jay. You all did great also. So now we are going to go to the central group A. That was my group. Diane, are you still on the call? Are you still in the meeting?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So talk about our family. We had the Murphys.
Okay. I thought Sunny was going to be doing this.
Sunny, you can chime in, Sunny, if you want.
So our family is the Murphy family, and they are an older couple with grandchildren, and our general description kind of went around what that looked like. Older people are semi-retired with a spouse and looking for something intergenerational, and that what was good for older people would be good for younger people. So we didn't go deep into their daily routine, but that kind of feeds into the goals, which is that they may be retired, but they are still going and doing their volunteering. They've got church and social and family stuff, but they still have to go to grocery store and medical appointments, and they still go out to eat and go to cultural events and go to the gym. And some of them are going back to work if they are like the Murphy family, and they are looking for a safe and convenient way to do this that is successful, because the trip doesn't take nearly as long as it does in a car. It doesn't take any longer than in the car. It's very reliable, very predictable, that kind of thing.
Okay. Here are some of the attitudes, though.
Yeah, some of the attitudes I think are built in because of the history, which would be reluctant to use public transportation because there's a fear of the unknown. They feel like they're vulnerable and they're frustrated because they don't know how it all works, and not going to be motivated unless there is a real need to get motivated, or it's more convenient to do, or in some cases more financially viable to do that than to drive a car. And without getting a little peer pressure of other people that they know doing this, they might not do it unless they really need it to stay independent.
Some of the recommendations.
We were all over the place. But they kind of all come together, and I think the universal design principle was someone said that, and I think that kind of brings it together. Making sure that it's accessible, making sure that it's clean and safe, has a good map, having a way to be predicted, like a smartphone app that's really good and works really well and is simple, like the one that they have now for the streetcar. Traveling, a lot of things around safety and reliability and scheduling, making sure that people can actually get to transit stops. So the sidewalks and curb cuts and crossings and all have to be in order for that. And to make sure that when we're doing all that, that it includes younger folks as well. So not just an older retired person who might have some mobility issues, but also a 30-something mom with a stroller, so that it all comes together.
Thanks, Diane. Great job. So those were the
Hey,
Murphys.
do you care if my group goes really quick? Our representative, I think, needs to take off, and I wanted to allow him the space to present.
Yep, you're South Person A, right?
Yes,
Or
yes,
not?
yes.
I
Yes.
don't see any people. Oh, here it is.
Oh,
Got
Michael
moved.
Kelly
Okay.
is the one who's
James Brown. Here we go. Go ahead, Michael. Or did we lose him?
I sure hope not. Let me see.
He appears to be here. I've just asked him to unmute.
Okay, thank you. You're the best.
Maybe.
Mike is here in spirit, at least.
Bobby, do you want to walk through it or ask
Yeah,
another
sure,
person from
I
your
can.
group? Okay.
So our person is Jamie Brown. Jamie is about 30, age range is 30 to 50 years old. They live in the Brookside, Waldo area. They do sort of a professional services kind of white collar job, but have to occasionally commute. 2 or 3 kids, is divorced and cares for a mobility impaired parent who lives in the home with Jamie. So we were very thoughtful about, and a lot of side discussion about a lot of how these elements affect their transportation life, which didn't necessarily make it onto the page, but we talked a lot about how in the future, universal design and accommodations for individuals with disabilities will be better. And so that will make the pedestrian experience and just the experience for all other transportation system users better. That's going to be one of the things that I guess would translate to an attitude for Jamie and their family, is that things are better in that regard. So helping the parent that they take care of is much easier because of that. So Jamie, we talked a lot about sort of their like boring but important types of trips. And for instance, because they're divorced, they have to shuttle the children back and forth to and from their ex-partner's home. They have a lot of responsibilities in terms of getting the parent that they care for to their doctor and to the gym and physical therapy and to the grocery store. Their children do extracurriculars. They commute occasionally, not all the time, but they still have to be places for work, and then also errands. We were going to get to some more social things, but we were having good, robust conversation throughout. And so the idea is when we talked about their commute, we were hoping that in 2040, it would be a reasonable option for Jamie to use mass transit, in particular rail, to be able to get to work. When their children did extracurriculars, we were hoping that the children would have a reasonable option to be able to walk or bike because those things were close enough and that the network was good enough for them to be able to get to instruments or, piano lessons or baseball practice or something along those lines.
Bobby, those sound like recommendations.
Yeah,
can you pop them
I'm
into
just
the thought
phrasing
bubble?
them that way because I'm
It
silly.
sounds like they sound like that.
Yeah, I'm phrasing them that way. I mean, this is what Jamie does. Sorry. One of the things I felt like we were on the precipice of discussing, but we didn't, was like the relative independence of the parent that they care for. So it's sort of like a multi-generational household. And we were probably about to address whether or not that parent was able to get around themselves. And then how independent the children are, and then what their social life was like. And I'll say it for the fourth time, we were really enjoying each other's company. So we didn't get that far, but we talked a lot about what the future of Kansas City should be like. So I think it was good.
I think you did a great job. It sounds like that person has a complicated, packed life.
Yeah.
And so I think that's cool.
Yes, indeed.
So we have one more then.
Thanks to my group. You guys were awesome.
Super cool. Super cool. Here's our last group. This looks like the Jen family. Sean, is that you? Who's reporting back for your group?
Sorry, Steve Miller. I'm going to report on our group.
Awesome.
Yeah,
thanks, Steve.
sorry. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, Steve's gonna take it from here. I made up the names, so we didn't quite get to that, but yeah, take it away, Steve. Thanks.
Okay, so we have a 45-year-old single mother with a grown adult child at home, and also caring for a grandchild. She has a junior college education. She is in a management position. She does own one car, but she often shares that with her adult child, who is carless but needs it. The uses they have for it are obviously to get to work, both for her and for her adult child. She has family care and personal items such as church and other just recreation and getting around. Her goals are to have other options, since she's sharing a car, that are both safe and efficient. She is open to those other modes of transportation, bus, streetcar, not so certain about a scooter, but that might be the option for her adult child at home. Let's look at her attitudes. Concerned about cost, the burden of the cost of a personal vehicle with breakdowns or maintenance. We did, we looked at her concern for safety, whether it's bike or walking. For her grandchild that is home, having good bus access to relieve some of that burden. She's concerned not just about the safety and the cost, but also just the efficiency of the public transportation options. She is someone that's practically oriented. She's a survivor. She figures she's a problem solver, and she is willing to be open to exploring these other options. So I think that addresses her attitudes.
And here's your recommendations.
Yeah, so recommendations, these are probably some of these are observations about what we see occurring 20 years from now, that we will have a community where autonomous vehicles will be a reality, that our current car sharing services such as Uber and Lyft will be done still by individuals, but with autonomous vehicles as well, that a car may be more of a service than a possession, that you will pay a monthly service fee to have access to a car. But again, for families that are working paycheck to paycheck, that renting and service may not be financially feasible. There'll still be old cars and clunkers on the road, and our mom may have one of those because she can't afford the ride sharing services are out there. We envision some increased density and some decentralization so that destination trips are shorter for the essentials of life. We're hopeful that there's long-term funding source for our transit that allows fare-free transit to occur. So I think that kind of is our vision for the future, and also some of the goals like fare-free transit and good and safe options.
Thanks, Steve. Your group did a great job also. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who helped to build your personas. I think you all did a wonderful, wonderful job today. A really wonderful job. And with that, I want you to know this. So our next 2 meetings have to do with recommendations. We're going to spend 2 meetings sharing draft recommendations, refining those recommendations with you. We need to compare those recommendations to the goals for mobility, but we also need to compare them to the personas that you've developed. We want to make sure that our recommendations are also helping to achieve the goals that you outlined that are going to be important for Kansas Cityans as we think about the future. And so that's why we've worked with you all to develop those personas, again, so that we can place people inside those recommendations, inside those improvements, to see who's being impacted positively and negatively. That I give it back to Bobby. And Jay, you might share your screen with what's next.
Thanks to everybody for, okay, here we go. I was waiting for the slide to show up. I really appreciate everyone for being here today and participating and being so willing to try something new. As I said to my group, we really wanted to be out there at this point and be face-to-face with everybody and do something fun and exciting and a little bit more engaging. And alas, safety concerns were back online, and we, through Trevise's brainstorming and us working together, we pulled something like this off just to try to, humanize the system and understand what some of the smaller detail impacts are, take a break from the larger view. And I think that if all the conversations were as good as the one we had, I thought it was really great, and we're able to humanize things. But so the next meeting we have, we're going to skip October. We're going to do November and December. And those meetings are where we're going to sort of run our preliminary concepts, recommendations by the group, and get feedback from everybody. Now, like all the other meetings, if you can't make those, all this stuff will still be online and you can go and engage that way, which there's going to be a lot of information. And I imagine a decent amount of it's going to be offline as well. So just keep that in mind. But we're not done yet. November, December. I hope you guys are all enjoying this beautiful fall weather. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the great meeting. Thanks for the feedback.
Peace.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.